Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Scott Luton and always special guest, Mike Griswold, here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
Doing great, Scott. Again, highlight of my week is spending time with you and the folks talking about supply chain. Doesn't get any better than that.
Well, that is high praise from a special VIP, and same here. And I tell you, I really enjoyed getting you and Corinne Bursa together on the last episode. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But folks, got a great show teed up here today as we continue one of our longest running and most popular series, Supply Chain Today and Tomorrow, with Mike Griswold with Gartner. Mike, of course, serves as Vice President Analyst with Gartner. And we've got a great show. Lots of stuff to get into today. We're going to be talking about, of course, tariffs. We're going to be talking about a big milestone over at Amazon and how a big retail player, a different one, has got some new things up its sleeve as when it comes to mall space. So stay tuned, folks, as we dive into all that and more with the one and only Mike Griswold. Okay, Mike. So I want to start with a fun warm-up question. And goodness, hadn't our fun warm-up questions kind of ran the gamut over the last few years, huh? Well,
Yeah.
we're recording this in basically 4 or 5 days after the NFL Super Bowl was played that just about surprised everybody. So congrats to all the Philadelphia Eagles fans out there across our audience. Mike, with that as a backdrop, what is one of your favorite memories of watching the big game in your journey?
So I still am, as much as it pains me to admit this, but a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, and it's been a long time since we've been anywhere near a Super Bowl. But I think some of my memories are some of those early '90s teams with Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin, and I just more people than you can probably mention, and just how well they played, during the '90s. And just also just how much the game has evolved. Everything from the game itself to the production of the game, the coverage of the game, the global nature of the game. It's really evolved into a significant event. They had a stat they showed during this Super Bowl where they compared several things from the first Super Bowl. Things like how much an ad costs, which I think was around 40 grand, to what a 30-second ad costs now, which is almost, I think, $7 or $8 million. Wow. So the size of the players, I think the average size in Green Bay's first Super Bowl was like, I don't know, 6'2", 6'3", and maybe 250, and the average size now is 6'5", 6'8", and closer to 300 pounds. So everything has evolved, and I think there's obviously a supply chain lesson in there, which is you have to, even though you have something as successful as the Super Bowl, you need to continue to iterate on it, right? Or you're going to get passed by. So,
That's
yeah,
right.
some of those 1990s Cowboys teams, some of my best memories.
I love that. That takes me back to my age where I collected football cards when the John Madden video game series first came out, and then it soon got the NFL license. So you had the best NFL video game of all time, and it ended up being like, 30 seasons worth, 30
Right.
years of the same game. And of course, those Cowboys that everybody thought was going to win 30 Super Bowls. And it started, Mike Griswold, it started with that miraculous trade where they sent Herschel Walker to the
Right.
Vikings, and they got a bunch of draft picks, and
Right.
that led to that incredible 90s dynasty, huh?
Exactly. I mean, I think you can look at moments when you have these kind of inflection points. We think about Drew Bledsoe gets hurt, Tom Brady comes in,
Right.
the rest is history. How many teams passed on Patrick Mahomes as an
Right.
example when he came out of college. So you have all of these different inflection points where if someone had made a different decision, I mean, again, as a Cowboy fan, I go back to the fact that Jerry Jones could not get along with Jimmy Johnson, and they
Yes.
probably left at least two more Super Bowls probably on the table the way that team was constructed. And with Jimmy Johnson, the coach, and the age of the team, I think not that they would have won more, but they could have at least competed to be in a couple more Super Bowls. But
That's right.
you have these inflection points and these decisions that people make or don't make that have far-reaching ramifications that you really can't see at the time you're making those decisions.
So true. Excellent commentary there. That can be applicable to any organization, right?
Yeah.
You never know what small or big decision that may not feel like it at the time, what that's going to open up for your organization. A couple quick thoughts there. Number one, you touched on the supply chain behind the big game. Our friends over at KetaQ had a great blog article around the logistics behind the Super Bowl. So check that out. Along the same lines, one of my favorite Super Bowl memories of all time, Mike Griswold, is this guy. So William, the refrigerator Perry, grew up in my hometown of Aiken, South Carolina. A lot of folks may be familiar with the fridge. This is him spiking the football back in '86. The Super Bowl was '85 season. Of course, that Bears team that everybody loves probably to this day. But a lot of folks don't know about his younger brother, Michael Dean Perry, that they called the Icebox, who also played at Clemson, also from my hometown. And he was also all-star all-pro in the NFL as well for a couple of years. And then one last thought, Mike, before we leave the NFL and get into tariffs. You were talking about how the game is going global. Quick question. Let's see if your crystal ball works. I got to think the NFL is testing the global market for an international team with the games as they're playing in different places around the globe. When do you think, what year will the first international NFL team join the league, you think?
Great question. I just want to give you one quick reaction to the fridge picture, which is it always disappointed me that Walter Payton never got a touchdown in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
But other than that, I by no means begrudge the fridge for getting his. It's an interesting question. We continue to see more and more games out there. I mean, I'll give you my answer, Scott, because you asked me a direct question. I hope we don't see it,
Okay.
but my guess is we're probably 3 to 5 years away, I think. And I just struggle. I mean, given this is a supply chain discussion, I struggle with the logistics of this.
Yeah.
Of teams, multiple teams now having to go international, right? So if you're, in a 4-team division like we have today, you've got 3 teams at least that are now going to have an away game someplace, literally in a different continent. You're going to have the remaining, 14 games, half of which someone's going to have to go there. You as an international team are going to have at least half your games now in a different continent. So, and I don't know logistically how you make that work equitably when you have games Sunday, Monday, and Thursdays.
Yeah.
I just don't know how you make that travel work so that some teams are not disadvantaged by the travel, because everyone knows that there are impacts to your body when you have that length of international travel and then have to be put in a high performing situation. So I hope it doesn't happen, but my guess is 3 to 5 years, we will see somebody somewhere.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a great guess. And the logistics behind it, as you are talking about, will be add a whole new complex element. We'll see. Okay, Mike, a lot of good stuff. We could probably talk about the NFL for a couple hours here, but we got to get into this timely topic, the gift that keeps on giving. And that's the topic of tariffs. All right. So as of this recording, Mike, let me see if I can keep up here. So the White House has tariffs for Canada and Mexico delayed until early March as they continue negotiations. it has placed tariffs on China, who has since reciprocated. And then just really hours ago, the White House has announced reciprocal tariffs on all countries, which, based on what I've learned, it supposedly is going to determine that via a country by country review. So, Mike, a broad question for you: your take on these tariffs, especially from a supply chain leadership perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things, Scott, and I'm sure there are some much better Southern analogies that you can provide given your heritage. But this is like clear as mud, and it is as fluid as probably Jello. I mean, the fact that we've gone from tariffs, they're now on hold. We've now gone from if you tax us, we're going to tax you. I think, and all of this, just based on the administration, is certainly subject to change.
Right.
So, to me, it's hard to try and predict kind of where we're going to end up. I think trying to predict where we're going to end up is probably a waste of people's time. I think where we're better off expending energy, as I think we talked about last time, is in some of the basics that we learned during COVID around things like risk management and around things like building a risk playbook and understanding some of the levers that you have that can help you, try to drive some resilience. Because I think at the end of the day, when we think about tariffs as a supply chain, what we're trying to build as a response mechanism is really resilience. Right? How can we be more resilient? We have a piece of research. I will, if I can, I'll put it in
Sure.
LinkedIn, where we talk about kind of these levers that supply chains have to create resilience. It could be manufacturing levers, right? Do we have opportunities? And I think the opportunities, Scott, were probably just before what you just shared around if you tariff us, we're going to tariff you. But I think thinking about, do we have other opportunities for production in other areas that maybe aren't as heavily tariffed or have as much risk of having tariffs? What
Yep.
can we do now around inventory? Right. We've seen all kinds of ebbs and flows around how we want to think about inventory. Way back when it was just in time, we found out that was a problem during COVID. Now I'm wondering, do people need to be thinking about buffering inventory because I can get it now, maybe pre-tariffs? So, and then what are the ramifications of that? Your CFO probably not super keen on that potentially, right? You may not even have adequate storage space, but it's those types of things. Is it things around partners? One of the things we're talking to clients about is, can you build some partnerships to mitigate some of the tariff risks that you might have? So I think it really is. It's more about how much resiliency can we build in our supply chain? And I think it's less about focusing on trying to predict what's going to happen because I think if there's many things people I'm sure want to say about the current administration, predictability is probably not one of them. So
Right.
trying to expend energy on predicting what's going to happen is probably not a good use of people's time. I think a better use of time is figuring out how do we create this resiliency and flexibility within our supply chain to deal with these things as they become a little bit more concrete.
Yeah. Well said. I like that last one of your last points you made, because it sure is a whole heck of a lot easier to predict us fickle consumers across the globe than it is to
Yeah,
predict what some of our politicians are going to
yeah,
do and what they will do and all that good stuff. One last
yeah.
thought about tariffs, and we're going to keep our finger on the pulse, of course, as in all of industry is. But it's almost, to some, they may see this drip, drip, drip of announcements. Of course, nothing takes place in the vacuum. You got all these ongoing negotiations. It's all being used as leverage, of course, but you would almost like to think if the administration had come out and said in January, hey, this is all the new tariff schedule, and it's all going to be
Right.
implemented on June 1st. right? Supply chains would probably celebrate because at least it gives some finiteness to our planning, right, Mike? But instead of that, and I'm not one to, I'm not an international trade expert, but instead of that, it's like the uncertainty and the shifting sands continue to multiply, which makes it even trickier, huh?
Yeah, Scott, I two thoughts. The first is I agree with you completely. I think most supply chain professionals would rather understand kind of the challenge and when it's going to become a challenge and that we can deal with it. Even if it's going to be incredibly problematic, we at least want as much heads up around that as we can get. To your point, great example, come figure everything out first, give us a target date, say this is when these things are going to be, in play, and then let us figure out how we want to navigate versus
Right.
this kind of dripping of things that are still kind of quite fluid. The other observation I would make, if I bring us back to this recent Super Bowl, the Eagles and the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs were exposed from an offensive line perspective, and I think people who had followed the Chiefs and followed the NFL knew that was a problem, and the Chiefs knew that was a problem, over the entire course of the season. And they tried to put some band-aids on it, and it manifested itself in the debacle that we saw during the Super Bowl. The supply chain message in that is tariffs are coming, right? Pretending that they're not, or burying your head in the sand and hope they go away, similar to the Chiefs hoping their offensive line problems would go away, is not a healthy strategy. So my advice to folks is to start thinking about how are we going to deal with these, not if we're going to have to, because we are going to have to deal with them in some form or fashion. And
Right.
wishing them away is not going to work.
Excellent point. And one last follow up before we move over to some big news Amazon is making. Sat down with a variety of leaders at a recent industry event, and one of these brilliant minds talked about, who I really admire, talked about how we're getting a little bit of reprieve in a regulatory sense over the next few years.
Right.
However, in the more of the macro view, it's probably a safe bet, and see if you agree, that we're going to see more regulation, whether it's related, and here in the States, whether it's related to sustainability or perhaps more constraints around AI or other things. And while we might get while industry may get a couple year reprieve, things are probably shifting in the bigger trajectory towards more and more regulation. And that's kind of one of the lessons learned that I'm hearing you say is, while of course we got to get ready for, and in a predictive and a reactive manner handle business today, we got to keep our wits about us in terms of the larger shifts about where we're going to be in 4, 5, 6 years. Mike, does that make sense? You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree, and I think the problem that we were trying to solve via regulations, I think that orientation and that lens is going to change, right? The previous administration had regulations in place to solve, in their view, specific problems.
Right.
This administration is going to have regulations in place that are going to have a completely different spin. I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're going to take a completely different take
Right.
on regulations, right? That is targeting a their perception of a different problem we need to fix. And I think people just have to go into this trying to understand, where are these regulations coming from and how do they affect me?
Yep. That's right. Good stuff. We could spend, man, between the NFL and tariffs, we could
Yes.
talk for weeks, I think. Mike, let's get to this story. This was an interesting one here from a few weeks ago from our friends at Retail Dive. Big milestone over at the Big A. As reported by Retail Dive, Amazon launched Prime about 20 years ago, and recently it celebrated its 9 billionth item shipped on the same day or next day. Now, of course, Amazon changed the game in so many ways over the years. It continues to change the game in so many ways, especially when it comes, though, at the core, and probably what gave the Amazon effect that moniker is shipping expectations for consumers everywhere, right? But not just that. Returns policies, inventory availability, the user interface and ordering, or user experience rather, and ordering convenience, you name it. And they just don't stop pushing the envelope. Get this, in 2024, Amazon increased the number of same day delivery sites by more than a whopping 60%. It now serves more than 140 metro areas. Now, with all that as a backdrop, Mike, and not to sound Pollyannish, but I got a two-part question for you. Number one, your thoughts on the ongoing, very real Amazon effect. And number two, while the customer, of course, is the North Star, is this massive shift, continued shift to almost instantaneous shipping, shipification, I'll call it. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, it's interesting when I was reading the notes for this, Scott, and it's kind of the intersection of this is quite fascinating. My wife and I are huge Jeopardy fans,
Okay.
and we watch Jeopardy every night. And there was a question yesterday that had specifically to do with Amazon. The question was around kind of this company, opened at $18 a share, blah blah blah. And I'm thinking to myself, man, if I had a Wayback Machine, I definitely would have gone back and bought some Amazon at 18 bucks a share. I don't know what it's trading at now. I know it's trading at a lot more than 18 bucks. But this is a fascinating article, I think, in at least two ways. You're exactly right. When I was an analyst talking to retailers, Amazon was changing so many things around that initially we perceived as non-supply chain related. Why do I care that they give me updates on my orders? Why do I care that they encourage me to put more things in my shopping cart? Well, there's obvious supply chain ramifications to all of that. And what they forced retailers to do is really up their game, both from a consumer experience, right? So now everybody's website, for the most part, I would say, has very similar capabilities to Amazon. Tracking, substitutions, whatever it might be. And I think Amazon also pushed people to recognize that the ability to deliver faster and the ability to give customers a kind of tiered preference. If you want it tomorrow, here's how much it's going to cost you. If you can wait 5 days, I'll give it to you free. Right? In a world where retailers in particular had no concept of that flexibility, right? It was everything from distribution centers was on a fixed schedule. You got your stuff when you got your stuff. Thank you very much. So Amazon's ability to continue to innovate and iterate, I think has done a lot of really good things for retailers. From the standpoint, is it forced them to get better, right? It forced them to acknowledge that the internet was going to become a commerce platform, right? You and I both, I'm sure, can remember conversations with retailers thinking, internet, well, it's not going to last very long. People will never want to buy stuff online, right? People never want to buy groceries online. And we know how much that has changed. So I think, Amazon's ability to move the entire industry into areas that we probably left to our own devices would have never got there. I think has been good. And I've used this example before, right? There's one of my favorite lines in the very first Jurassic Park is just because you can make dinosaurs doesn't mean you should make dinosaurs. and just because we can get stuff to people like same day, intraday, doesn't mean we necessarily should or have to do that. I think what's starting to emerge is I talked to some of our sustainability analysts here at Gartner, is there are emerging demographics that are now weighing the environmental costs of these deliveries. And people saying, you know what, I don't need this tomorrow. I don't even need this today because I know the environmental impact that we're placing on our environment by having all of this stuff come today or all of this stuff come tomorrow. So I think for consumers, for retailers and other, B2C types of entities, you have to be able to offer that flexibility because yes, there will be people that need their underwear tomorrow. There will be
Right.
people that don't need their underwear for 5 days. So offering those types of flexibility, I think is important. And I think if we're honest, it's still a muscle that many retailers are still building and still exercising.
Oh, Mike, excellent perspective. Two quick thoughts. First off, the stock price 229 today. So you were talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that Jeopardy question where it was $18. Yeah, we
yeah.
all wish we had that hindsight. Secondly, to your point about a growing contingent of your consumer population is growing more mindful of the sustainability impact of their shopping behaviors. Completely agree with that, I welcome that. And in fact, Amazon is acting on that. As if you've noticed, Mike, many of our watchers and listeners know, they've added that messaging in the checkout, um, uh, the shopping cart, the checkout process, where as you consider your delivery options, they kind of encourage you if for less boxes or less trips or you name it. I love seeing that. I love seeing that. And then lastly, Jeopardy. I don't watch it every day like I used to. Who has been your favorite host after the late great Alex Trebek left us? Who's been your great fill-in host, Mike?
Well, this is where there's great division within the Griswold household. I don't mind Ken Jennings. My wife can't stand him. So I'm I think, as in many instances, the original is the original. Alex, super hard to replace. I think they landed in a good spot with Ken Jennings, but he's not for everybody.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
He sure is smart. Goodness gracious.
Oh my goodness, yes, yes,
Um, okay, so learn a little tidbit there. I think I'd forgotten that y'all were such big Jeopardy
yes.
passionistas. Okay, so we're gonna shift over from NFL, from tariffs, from Amazon, from sustainability to kind of a throwback topic, and I'm gonna share this little graphic up here. So I shared a few weeks back. I posed a question across social that asked, "Can shopping malls in the U.S. make a gigantic comeback?" And it would be gigantic. It'd be enormous, right? Back in my mall rat heydays, I lived at shopping malls in the 80s and 90s. Mike, you get a slice of Sabaro pizza. You check out the new Nintendo games at Electronics Boutique. You go get a new cassette single. Some folks aren't going to know what that is at Camelot. Yeah, you'd buy a
Yeah.
single song on a cassette tape and it cost you $20. That's crazy. And then back then, $5 would get you hours of gameplay at the arcade.
Yeah.
Some really good games, right? So CNBC reported about a month ago that shopping malls in the U.S. peaked at about 2,500 in the 1980s, and they're at about 700 now. But as the graphic shares, about 2 weeks ago, CNBC also reported that Walmart is now a mall owner. It had purchased the Monroeville Mall, which is about 12 miles outside of Pittsburgh. And when I first read this headline, I was thinking about how retailers have been repurposing mall space for operational reasons in recent years, like for targeted fulfillment operations and whatnot. But for this space, Walmart hasn't shared its intentions yet, Mike. One of their partners, Cypress Equities, which is quoted in the CNBC article, they say it'll be a quote, retail driven mixed use project, end quote. CNBC suggests it might be housing, restaurants, retail, you name it. Whatever it may be, perhaps malls will continue to find a new life in a more repurposed manner. Mike, your thoughts on the shopping mall scene?
Yeah. So the other thing that was missing from your trip back in time was washing all that down with an orange Julius. But yeah, the pizza, yeah, all of those places, the arcade. I think most people are going to have to Google a lot of that stuff, Scott, that listens
That's
to
right.
our stuff. It's interesting. My wife and I lived in Penn Hills for a while, which is just outside of Monroeville, and we've been to that mall numerous times. I
Okay.
think a lot of this comes right back to our previous discussion on Amazon and the fact that Amazon has expanded, has created such a marketplace footprint that you don't have to leave the comfort of your couch to pretty much browse the mall, right? I mean, almost anything that you would want or find in a mall outside of the Sbarro Pizza and the Orange Julius, from a merchandising perspective, you can find it Amazon and then get it sent to your house, and depending on priority, get it tomorrow. I think if I go back to my time, in which is before your time, but very similar in terms of why we went to the mall, right? That we went to the mall. All the things that you mentioned, Scott, you bought, I think, one thing. The rest of it was a social not experiment, a social engagement. You went to go to hang out with your friends and wander around the mall. Parents felt pretty good because it was a relatively safe environment. It was an enclosed area, right? And I think what we've lost sight of is the fact that that social piece has also been replaced, right? We can talk as much as we want about how much we like or dislike social media, but that has become our for many people their go-to social engagement, right? So we don't need to physically go to the mall. We can connect virtually through social media. We don't need to go to the mall to shop. We can do that virtually through people like Amazon and others. So it's interesting to see what people want to do with this space, given those other two needs are being met, and I would argue being met fairly efficiently through other vehicles. The Walmart example, I think, will bear watching, because similar to Amazon, I think Walmart has done a lot to innovate and move the retail industry forward. Is this going to be, maybe a better place to pick up e-commerce orders? Are they going to give you a different shopping experience within this type of environment? Maybe more of a, potentially a department store feel than necessarily the supercenter feel that you get when you walk into a traditional Walmart. One thing I can guarantee is that Walmart, given their propensity to watch costs, has, I think, a really good idea of what they want to do in that area. And I think it's going to be a play to drive efficiencies somewhere. One of the folks I used to work with said Walmart was a supply chain company that just happened to have, 5,000 stores. And I think that's very true, right? Walmart is a supply chain company that now has this particular property to figure out, how do we drive, cost efficiencies, but also how do we drive a different type of experience. So it will be interesting to see, Scott, how this plays out. I mean, I was fascinated by the numbers you shared of how we went from several thousand to 700. I mean, that's, if that, I don't know what the continuum is for animals, right? Extinct is like the bottom. There's like there's a level before that, like near extinct, endangered, maybe. I would say I would put balls on the endangered species list. They're not extinct yet, but that dramatic drop of several thousand to 700, doesn't bode well.
Some of our folks out there watching or listening, Mike, may be asking themselves, what is the fascination? Why are we talking about malls? And I'd point them back to the first part of your response, because it's so spot on. Back in the 80s, 90s, and certainly before that the mall served so many different parts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for consumers. And it was a giant on the scene, and it created so much revenue and transactions and social interaction, all those things you mentioned. And so I can't help but to be fascinated knowing what I experienced and kind of seeing how my consumer journey, how it's evolved for all of us, to now seeing a lot of these massive complexes, so many of them sit dormant. And so when I see a story, to your point about Walmart, because they are moving the needle in so many different ways innovatively, I can't wait to see what they do with this mall and see if that might be that create a copycat effect across the U.S. with some of these other properties. So we shall see. One other thing, we'll see if Amanda's listening back there. Big tip of the hat to Amanda, always Johnny on the spot when it comes to production. There's a great documentary, and I cannot remember the name of it. We might get it in a second, but it kind of it follows the timeline. I think it's called Jasper Mall, and I think it's in Jasper, Alabama or Mississippi. And it's a real documentary that focuses on some of the challenges of the modern mall era. And I could not, a couple of years ago, I couldn't take my eyes off of this documentary, Mike. So we'll see if Amanda can find this. Let's see here. Jasper Mall came out in 2020. So, folks, if you're curious about the modern challenges of the mall in this modern era, check out the Jasper Mall documentary. Mike, I think you're good. You had one more comment, huh?
Yeah, I think I often have, at your age, wandering the mall and seeing the silver sneakers, right? That it was the place for people that are now my generation, had a place to get some exercise out of the elements, and could still do a little bit of shopping if they wanted to. So I think even that generation is becoming much more computer literate. That they don't, while they still need to find their paths for exercise, they don't need that path for shopping. So
That's right.
it'll be fascinating to see what Walmart does with this.
It will. And one last note, me and my son Ben went to Dallas Fort Worth a few weeks ago, and one of the many stops we made was in the Galleria, which of course is a massive mall in the Metroplex. And and not throwing any stones at anybody, but just spending some time walking through all the levels. It goes back to the point you made. We can get almost any experience with the exception of ice skating, by saving a trip out on a Saturday morning. And it just really reinforced that. So we'll see. Okay. So Mike, I'll tell you, the hits keep on coming. All the events and programming at Gartner. We've talked a lot in the last few episodes about the popular planning events, which will continue on in 2025. And we've got Gartner Supply Chain Symposium coming up in May 5th through the 7th in Orlando, Florida. We'll be there. So any of our listeners or viewers, if you're going to be at the symposium, reach out. We'd love to connect with you. But Mike, what's your favorite when it comes to symposium, right? We've talked about this a lot in recent years. You love the professional networking amongst many other things. Is that right?
Yeah, I think what we get, as you would imagine, a lot of feedback on the symposium, right? Everything from the venue to the content to the speakers. But one of the most consistent piece of feedback we get is the amount of networking that people do through attending of the sessions. But just the fact, I mean, we somewhat, I somewhat tongue in cheek call it, the world's largest gathering of supply chain professionals, and I think it's probably true.
Yes.
So it is such an opportunity to not only hear and learn, but meet your peers, meet practitioners that share the same struggles that you do, share some of the same successes that you've had. So it is and we try to the best of our ability to provide as many of those networking opportunities as we can, because we know people want to hear and chat with each other.
It's the best of the best, in my view. The True Cadillac Conference, May 5th through the 7th in Orlando, Florida. I believe registration is already open. It's probably been open.
Yes.
And if you're down there, let us know your key takeaways. But I completely agree with you, Mike. I tell you, I think we've shared here before. That's the largest supply chain happy hour I've ever been a part of.
Yes.
All right. So, Mike, my final question for you, as always. How can folks connect with the one and only Mike Griswold?
Email mike.griswold@gartner.com and LinkedIn. Those are the two best ways.
It's just that easy. And hey, folks, we'll see. Mike teased on the front end about dropping some Gartner research on his LinkedIn. We will find out if he follows through. It does just that. But in the meantime, If there's anything he shared here today that you want to learn more about, reach out to us. We'll track it down for you and we'll send it your way. How about that? Mike Griswold, Vice President Analyst with Gartner. Mike, always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Scott, and looking forward to next month.
We are too. Folks, hopefully you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Hey, take one thing from Mike here, share it with your team. You'll be better off if you do. Lots of opportunities out there and out here to change how supply chain happens both today and tomorrow. But it's powered by deeds, not words. With all that said, Scott Luton here challenging you to do good, give forward, be the change that's needed. We'll see you next time right back here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.